Good morning. My name is Host-Jablonski. I'm an architect. I work in Madison, Wisconsin. This is talk number 12, so this is high performance natural buildings if you're just coming in. So let me get right into it. Seems to be everybody's pretty much settled, and we've only got an hour together. I'm going to be talking about, at the first part at least, for the context, I'm going to show you this building. This is a house where I live. I've been building it as a place to live, and also as sort of a research and learning facility for myself since early 2000s. So that gives you a visual context. The site context, though, is very important. How many of you recognize this diagram or a diagram like this? This is the upper Midwest. Prevailing winds from the north and west. Sun, this is the wintertime view, by the way. So the house sits on the horizon. And what this shows is an important relationship that we have in this latitude, which is that the sun, our heat source, is always low in the sky and it's always southerly. I'm not going to go into, in this talk, I'm not going to go into passive solar design much, but I want to show you this as context, how that looks like, what that looks like in 3D is this. The house, again, sitting, very important that the sun in the summertime is high in the sky. The sun in the wintertime, your heat source in wintertime, is low in the sky. That affects design, and I'll talk about that a little later. So this is a house that's on an urban site. This is the site, actually, before we started building, 43 by 130 foot lot. This is not, the ideal solar lot. This is a lot that I chose for a bunch of ecological and sustainable reasons. It's 8 blocks or so, 9 blocks from my work. I can walk or bike to work. It's close to shopping. It's close to my grandkids. It's, in other words, a site that is very much like the sites that our clients at our architectural firm do all the time. Not the ideal solar site. It's not the pristine south-facing hill in the country someplace with the trees perfectly placed. So I was dealing with very consciously a set of design issues that are like what many people have, and I had to solve them for myself. So what I was interested in going into this, here's the architect, right? He's done this for decades. Now he's going to build his own house. He's going to jam everything into the project, and I'm no different. I wanted it to be energy efficient. I wanted it to be resource efficient. I wanted it to be beautiful, durable, affordable, accessible. I'll talk about the sustainability issues around accessibility, wheelchair accessibility, and accessibility for people of all different abilities and disabilities. And I wanted to use it as a context for my own learning and for teaching. So in the context of this particular house, you're going to see this is how this translates. A wood-efficient structural system, I'll get into that in a moment. The straw clay walls and earthen plaster on that integrates with the framing. If you get anything out of this talk, I hope you get out the notion that this is not about maximizing one specific element. It's about optimizing them and integrating them together. In terms of architectural practice, for me, that's what it's all about. It's not just inventing the perfect solar collector, although they're great. It's not about inventing the perfect insulation, although you need that. It's about putting all these things together. In an efficient building envelope, to the extent that we can do that with local materials, local labor, natural materials, non-toxic materials, you've got something that really can work all together. So one of the first steps we did, how many of you recognize this device called the Solar Pathfinder? Maybe a third of you. Very important, very simple, very clever. It's a device, you can get these online, I think they're up to about $150 now. Essentially, it gives you a snapshot. Any place you go, you can, you're going to place a solar collector on an existing roof, or you're going to build a new house and you want to find out what the best solar site is. This gives you a snapshot of the solar potential for that particular site or the spot where you're taking the reading. You can take multiple readings, go on the site, go different parts of the roof. So that's one of the first things we did is use this tool. And what it showed me is I've got trees in the way that I don't control. There's a big, beautiful elm tree, one of the last in the city after Dutch elm, wiped us out 30 years ago on the city terrace. That's not my tree, I can't control it. I've got another big maple tree, again, beautiful, gives me lots of shade, belongs to my neighbor. So what I did was, I understood a couple of things from that. Is the Dutch elm, or the elm tree could die next year, could be dying now, I don't know, it could last another 50 years. The maple tree, who knows? What I decided in terms of a design strategy was, without those two trees, I get a solar collector. So I should design the house to accept the solar collector, orient it, pitch the roof the right way, put all the pipes and the wires in, which is simple and fairly cheap during construction, but a whole lot harder later. set up the house to be for active solar. Meantime, build a good energy efficient passive solar house, because as we know, passive solar is less sensitive to shading than something like PV panels, or if you leave the fair, that's one of the facts you should know. The question is, how do you use the device, basically? It does not depend on light at all. It uses, this is the best shot here. Very cleverly designed. These arced lines are months of the year, December to June, back to December. The radial lines are hours of the day, whatever, 7 o'clock at night, noon, or 7 o'clock in the morning, noon, 7 o'clock at night. What you do, and then this is, if you notice, this is the chart, which you're actually, this is a copy of the chart. It's white ink on black paper. The reason for that becomes obvious when you get up on the roof or on the stepladder and you put this clear plastic dome over the top of it. It's got a very careful, somebody did the math to figure the curvature of that. So when the way you look at it on the inside, you probably can't see. There's a little bubble level. There is a compass. There's a thing here, a little device, you can't even see it, to set declination. You get that all set up right, level, compass point correct, and then you look down in it, and you've got in your hand it's kind of like a white crayon, grease pencil, it chips with it, and you can draw on this black paper. The reason that it's black is it acts like a store window, a shop window in twilight, where you can see in, but you also see the reflections. You need to see them both simultaneously. So all you're doing, you need some light to be able to see, but you can do this any time of day. You're seeing your drawing, you're tracing basically what you see with your eye on the glass, you're tracing it on the paper half an inch down below, and you're tracing the obstructions to the solar on that spot. So if there's a chimney in the way, or a roof, or your neighbor, or trees or whatever, you're tracing the outline of those. Then you come down off the ladder, your legs stop shaking, and then you look at your chart and you go, in this case, this here is kind of, I don't know if you can see it on the slide, it's kind of greenish or bluish, probably to your eyes. These show shaded parts. It shows in this particular spot, and this is actually the best I had on my site. Big elm tree, big maple tree. It shows that for most months, from about 10:30, 10:40 in the morning till about 2:20, 2:30 in the afternoon. Most months it gets a little better. At different times of the year. That's my solar window. That's some solar. That's not quite enough solar to go out and spend several $1,000s on, say, a hot water collector. Either of those trees go away, and I've got oodles of solar. So it's telling me, set up the roof, get ready for it, because one of those trees could go. The neighbor could trim the tree, whatever. I don't have control of that. Maybe I move out, and somebody in 10 years, the tree goes down. The house should be ready. It's thinking through the life cycle of the house rather than just what's good for me this moment. What's going to happen to this house on this side of this piece of the planet? So this wood efficient framing system, if you framed a house or you've ever seen a house being framed, this will look very familiar to you. In the North American continent here, we do a lot of wood framing, have historically. This is code, 2x4s, 16 inches on center. You want a window, well then you add a header, you add extra studs to hold up the header. Here's your loads coming down from your roof or your floor joists. Very, very normal. We tweak that. Now this gets into the integration with the straw clay, and it'll be a lot clearer to you if you came at 2 o'clock and you actually see how this works. But long story short, here's the same size, same loads, same amount of glass. We do some tweaks. Now, 10 years ago when I would give this talk, I couldn't say this, but today I would say that many builders are comfortable with, or getting more comfortable with 2x6s, 24 inches on center. So you're getting a deeper cavity, you're getting more insulation. Once you've done that, you haven't saved any wood. If you actually count up the board feet, skinnier pieces closer together, bigger pieces farther apart, about the same number of board feet. We take it a little further by making a design choice. We say, okay, now our studs, instead of being this far apart, they're this far apart. I can fit a window in that. I'm not going to get much of a window like that, but I can get a window here. If I accept that design limitation, and if I'm trying for this case study to be really wood efficient, what does that do? Well, one of the things that it does that's huge is no more headers. Typically, in the past, headers were old growth wood, strong beams. Now they tend to be engineered, but they're gone altogether. And all the studs that go into holding them up are no longer needed. Now all my loads are coming down directly on a bearing point. All my floor joists are 24 inches on center. My ceiling trusses or my roof trusses are 24 inches on center. All the loads come down. This is not a new idea. Forest Products Laboratory, a bunch of different codes, Arkansas Framing used to be called 40 years ago, have looked at this. But if you imagine my house, if you think of it like a shoebox, or maybe like a loaf of bread would be better. 24 inches on center, everything lines up. Very simple structural system. And the upshot of doing that is that on this particular house, this is a 24 by 36 house, 33% less wood. Okay, so now there's a monetary savings. There's obviously a resource savings. I've saved wood. What I kind of didn't anticipate, but turned out to be true, I had conventional carpenters hired to do this. They built it faster. This framing system is simpler. Here's an example. This wall, this is the south wall. This is going to have 8 windows in it. You know, faces the sun. That's done. We're on to the north wall when I took the picture. You just lay the studs down, 24 inches on center, tip up the wall, and you're done. You go on to the next wall. We've done you know, first floor framing or out exterior on houses this size in a half a day with carpenters who just learned the system that morning. Yes, sir.
So in other words, what you're saying is you're using each of those spaces for a window. So if you want a bigger window, you just put more windows.
Exactly.
Okay.
And instead of the windows being mulled together like from the factory,
right,
you just put them an inch and a half apart, or I'd say 2 inches with the shift spaces. You know, most people when they come in my house, they don't even notice. They don't even. I have to tell them that I did that because they just look like normal windows. The system is also very flexible. If you say for some reason you wanted a big old picture window, you just frame that part normally. You're going to use some extra studs. It's very flexible, and the beauty of it is that it uses the tools and the skill set that gazillions of carpenters already have. They can learn this quickly. Code official looks at it and goes, well, like all the loads are lining up, you know, everything works. We have no trouble with code officials getting. I've had people, in fact, the inspectors, like they hit the curb, you know, and they're like already filling out the approval tag because they can see that it's built or it's overbuilt, you know. Did you have another question?
And then, is there an issue with those studs being subject to sunlight and warping and all that kind of stuff?
Not really. I mean, that would be true of all framing. If you like let it to weather, you'd have issues. But if you do it in the normal construction timeline, they get covered up, and that's really not an issue. I mean, I would say, and this is one of the things that has, you're sort of touching on an issue, which is one of the things that has, I think, slowed the introduction of what's called advanced framing, 2x6, 24 inches on center. It's the notion of you've got to have better wood. You can't have all twisty wood. I mean, one of the things that carpenters have gotten used to, unfortunately, is poor quality wood. And the more pieces that you have, the inconsistencies kind of even out, and you can still get flat, you know, like board products on it, sort of successfully. When you go to fewer pieces, they got to be better. They got to be straighter because you've got fewer of them. If you can think through the geometry in your mind how that works. So, you know, you just pick out good studs. Anyway, I want to take this analogy a little further. One of the things that you'll see again at 2, and I'll show you some pictures now. Hopefully, you'll get a sense. The straw clay infills between the studs. It's a solid infill. It's pretty solid. It's you know, it's not structural, but it's quite solid. It forms the surface that you otherwise associate with sheathing. You know, if you put your building wrap on, your siding and so on, the straw clay is doing it. So you don't have to sheathe the house. We brace it laterally in other ways, and so we didn't have to buy 27 sheets of wall sheathing. Plus, you don't have the vapor intrusion or the vapor barrier in the wrong place kind of issues, which is a whole other discussion. But here's how, in summary, here's how the cross section works. You know, high levels of recycled cellulose insulation, R60 in the roof. The roof trusses are designed to accept that with huge energy heels. The straw clay in the walls. This is a 1.5-story house. In this case, it's got an earthen floor. I'll show you shots in a second. This is what's called an air core floor. It's part of the passive solar system. And then higher levels of insulation. Big overhangs are very important. They're not just style. You saw the photograph earlier. I like to show this website because this you can go on the susdesign.com website to size overhangs for your windows, and it's a very important part of the design. Like I say, it's not just for style, and it's not just for solar. It's very important for solar, especially on the south side, to get your overhangs right. On the north side, east and west, it's less important for solar reasons, but it's extremely important for building longevity reasons. One of the things that we've done in the modern century is, you know, we have modern architecture, we have Bauhaus, we have all these styles. We've in many cases have gotten away from traditional wisdom, which is the overhangs. Roofing is basically sacrificial. It's not going to last forever, but it protects everything that's below it. And one of the things that I've noticed in my career is the lengths of overhangs totally determine life of windows, life of siding, amount of mold on the lower parts of siding, and you can really tune the lengths of overhangs to protect the walls. It's especially important when you get into, in the case of my house, for example, natural materials on the exterior. They're not as hardened as, say, stone or brick or I dare say vinyl siding, which maybe only lasts 20 years, but at least before it goes into the landfill. But at least during that time, it's not washing away in the rain. Unlike, say, a natural plaster, unlike, say, a less naturally treated wood siding or something. So overhangs become very important, and traditionally that's their job. They would protect the vulnerable parts of the house. You get a good foundation, get it out of the ground a bit, get good overhangs, and you can practically do anything on your siding. That's an overstatement. But so what I like about this design tool is that with this thing you can do what in architecture school would take us a half a day to do a house. You can go through every window in seconds, basically, set the width, the height of the window, the length of the overhang, how deep it is, how far it is above the window, set all these parameters, place the house on the earth, right latitude, right direction, hit a button, and then it animates and shows you exactly what the sun's going to do on that window with that overhang configuration. And you can tune your overhangs however you need them to get the optimum performance, make decisions about when you want sun, when you don't want sun. It's free and very easy to use. So onto the straw clay walls. The straw clay material is a very interesting material. People have been mixing straw and clay together for millennia, right? Most of you have heard of adobe. There's a whole range, really, though, from adobe and rammed earth all the way up to what are called the light earths or wood clays, straw clays, and so on, into the spectrum. A lot of research has been done in Germany since the 80s on this, and we picked up on that. Some of the things we've discovered is, a real common question is, why bother? Why bother adding clay to straw? What's the point? The clay has a very interesting reaction, particularly with buildings. The biggest enemy of buildings throughout the world, throughout history, is water. Water in all its forms. Water not just coming down in buckets like we had last night, but condensation, snow drifts against foundations and up near water that backs up under roofs and under shingles by capillary action. Fog, condensation in all its form, moisture that gets pulled into air cavities by temperature differentials, which is actually a very common problem with modern code-approved cavity wall systems that are having mold problems all across the country because of air sealing issues. Clay loves water. It just does. In the talk right after this one, Douglas, the scientist, will talk to you about why that's so, how particle size, polarity of particles and so on. Clay has this incredible affinity for water. If you're walking around in a farm field with boots on after a rain, the stuff that's sticking to your boots is clay. It's not the sand. The sand's going to fall off your feet. If you're walking on a beach, the sand comes off your feet, right? It's pretty easy to knock it off. Clay will not just be knocked off. It's incredibly adhesive. When it gets by water, there's actually clay. The actual particles are they're microscopic. You cannot see them with an individual particle. You cannot see it with the individual eye. The particles are so small they're starting to interact with molecules of water, and they form amazing bonds. We use that capability. People have used that capability for millennia to stick buildings together, to stick building materials together. Adobe sticks together, cob sticks together, earthen blocks that you see in the tent as well stick together, mostly because of the adhesive nature of clay. So we're using it for its adhesivity. But how it deals with moisture is extremely interesting. If you take a raw, untreated bale and you make a building out of it, you have a basic issue, which is that you must keep that straw dry from the time you cut it in the field, to get it in the baler, to get it in the wagon, to get it in the building where you're going to store it, to get it to the building site, to get it in the wall. Undercover, you have to keep it dry, bone dry, that entire time. If it gets rained on once, you basically have to throw the bale out. The reason for that is that the straw is basically the same components as wood, the lignin, the cellulose, and so on, good straw. But it's very finely divided. Unlike a big chunk of wood, right? A straw bale has lots of air, lots of surface area. and it comes from the field. It's got natural mold and mildew spores already on it. You get it wet, and that mold and mildew has a perfect environment to grow. All you had to do is add moisture. It's all set to go. So unlike a big chunk of wood, which will take years and years and years to rot, a straw bale any kind of straw will rot fairly quickly because it has so much surface area. The thing by adding just a little bit of clay, and I emphasize a little, and if you come to the demonstration, you'll see how very little we do add. But to take the trouble to add to invent the techniques to add that little bit of straw, a little bit of clay, to each of the straws, does this amazing thing, which is that the clay basically keeps the water away from the straw. The clay it's like a raincoat, a few molecules thick. Is what it would be a layman's way to say it, I guess. It is so absorptive of the moisture, it just does not let the straw have the moisture. Proof of this, I've been in, a few years ago I was in Germany. I was in buildings that were straw clay 400 years old. They were being remodeled for their umpteenth time, and it was really wonderful looking condo kind of co-housing situation, 400-year-old buildings. I held in my hand a Ziploc bag filled with 700-year-old straw clay that looked like the stuff we had done in a workshop the week before I flew out. Golden, beautiful. It came out of a building that they had remodeled. This straw clay in this kind of configuration is really, I would say, the leader in longevity historically for these kinds of natural building materials. So I feel real confident about putting in a building if I'm doing it right. Now the problem with it is that in this climate is that traditionally the way it's been done, it's a little too heavy. You don't quite get the R value that you want. In this climate, upper Midwest, you want all the R value you can get. And that's one of the beauties of straw bale. But by adding a little clay to it, your R value goes down a little bit. So the art and the science really of doing the straw clay the way we're doing it is to put as little clay in it as we can get away with, to get the moisture benefits and the adhesivity, building benefits of it, and not have the downside so much of the insulation value. So we're at about at the densities we like, about 13 pounds per cubic foot, we're at about 1.7 R per inch. That translates, if you do the math quick, we typically do a 12-inch wall, now we're going to 14-inch walls. We're in a range of like R20 to 22 for a 12-inch wall would be at 25, 26 for a 14-inch wall. When you look at the total building, that's maybe, the walls are maybe 15 to 20% of the whole heat picture. That's a good number to be at. Here's some shots. This is a house we were doing in Jamesville. So there's a process that we use for mixing it. You'll see that at 2 o'clock. This tumbling machine. We have we're taking. When I say clay, I say straw clay. What I really should be saying is straw loam. We're taking earth out of the ground. We're not talking about like getting it in bags from a potter's supply place or something like that. We're taking it out of the ground. We're refining it on site. We're mixing it with straw on site, and we're making a high quality building material right there. Quality control is very important. Anytime you do that, it's a lot easier to order something off, get it on a truck and then you put it in the building. Is somebody else worried about all the quality control issues? When you're using natural materials, these kind of natural materials, you pay a lot of attention to quality control because you want the performance. I'm going to go back past this slide because we're running late.
Does the thermal mass go up at all with that little bit of clay?
The question is, does the thermal mass of the wall go up with a little bit of clay? Yes, it does. There's several tons of clay in it, even though you're only putting a few molecules on each, square centimeter. You're adding material, and so actually, straw clay has this interesting. It's a little wonkish, and I'm not going to talk about it a lot, but it has this interesting. Of the insulating materials, it has this interesting characteristic that it also has some thermal mass. So while you're getting the true measured, I'll show you in a second the lab report, for the insulation levels. While we're getting that true R value, we're also getting thermal mass effect. And so these houses actually they perform better than they look on paper because of that effect. And that's unusual. Most insulations, like cellulose, fiberglass, I dare say, which we don't use anymore as a substandard product. But a down sleeping bag, any insulation is light. It's fluffy. It's got a lot of air. It's the opposite of thermal mass. Thermal mass is going to have a lot of molecules. It's going to be dense. It's going to be stone. It's going to be concrete, wood. Not wood. Brick, water. steel, things that are dense and have lots of molecules. Insulation is the opposite, so it's unusual for an insulation material to have some thermal mass. We use the earthen plasters, and actually this is part of the thermal mass as well. You can end up with an inch of earthen plaster on the inside of the straw clay. You've got tons and tons again of thermal mass distributed around the house, more so than say drywall. The floor I mentioned earlier is called an air core floor. This is a type of thermal mass system. It's part of the passive solar system. I like it because it's simple. Do people know that when you say passive and active, do people know the difference between what's passive and active, what that means? Show of hands? Not so many. An active system is think of it as equipment. A solar panel. If you say a house is solar, most people are going to think of panel. It's up on the roof, whether it's hot water panel, PV panel. It's got wires, it's got pipes, it's got differential temperature sensors. It might have pumps. It's going to have something in the basement, an inverter or a tank. It's stuff. It's equipment. It's active. That's what we call active solar. Passive solar is basically a design strategy that takes the stuff that you're going to make the building out of anyway, and puts it in a certain configuration, and makes it tend to heat itself in winter and tend to cool itself in summer by how it's designed, by what you chose and where you put it. So in the case of this house, to make a passive solar house, you basically need three things. You need, and we've already talked about two of them. You need proper orientation. That's why you do the Solar Pathfinder business in the first place. So that's number one. Number two, you just make a good energy efficient house. You do the best you can, good windows and doors, good attention to detail, weather stripping, good thermal bridging, thermal break detailing, high levels of insulation. You just make an energy efficient house. If you just did those two things, you've got a pretty good house. To make a passive solar house, you go one step further and you add thermal mass to go with your correctly oriented house. The reason for that is that, you saw that slide right at the beginning where the sun's coming in low. You do your overhangs right, the sun's coming in your glass. You want to do something with it. Without thermal mass, your house just overheats. And this was actually a key error that architects were making back in the 70s. They were overglazing houses, not having enough thermal mass, so houses would overheat. It's January, the house is 80, and you're opening the windows to dump some of this heat because you don't have enough thermal mass. So what thermal mass is a substance, like I said, water, brick, concrete, stone, these kinds of massive materials that can absorb heat and then re-release it when you want it. In the case of my house, I use an air core floor because it's a simple way to do that. Floor slabs are great, a lot of mass, right? The problem is getting the heat to it because it's got stuff like carpets on it and furniture and beds and cabinets, and it's like not always available to either direct sunlight, and obviously all can't be available to direct sunlight because you've got stuff in the house, you've got people walking around, you've got furniture. Sometimes it isn't even very available if you've got carpet and so on or furniture on it. It isn't even available very much to air circulation, which is sort of the secondary way to get heat to that thermal mass. So an air core floor solves that in a very simple way. Basically a slab. This comes from the work, by the way, there's a book called The Passive Solar House Book, very creatively titled book, by a guy named James Cacciadorian, who's an engineer out of Vermont. He's done a lot of these houses. He's done calculations. It's a good resource book to look at. And so I modeled this after his work. Basically, it's a raised slab. In my case, it's raised on recycled bricks, and he uses a lot of concrete block. I wanted to use a clay-based system for the humidity issues. Big discussion we can talk about later. But anyway, long story short, you have a little bath fan, kind of sized fan, and you just pass the room air, the house air, underneath that slab. And so now you've got your slab exposed to that warmed air. You overglazed your house, sun's coming in, overheating your air, you're dumping that heat into your thermal mass because there's a time coming when there's not going to be any sun, right? Night. You want to have that heat stored, and then that heat re-releases back into the. Here's some other shots of it sort of under construction. And if we can talk later, I'll be around if people want to talk about these kind of details. What I was just getting into describing is a diagram that should be familiar to many of you. Okay, sun's low in the sky, it's coming in the skylight, in my case, because I've got trees. It's coming under the overhangs, it's coming into the house, heating up the floor, fan circulates. At nights, if you got insulated shutters, you close them, heat rises. Very passive. The only active thing in this whole business is this little bath fan that's running, a few watts to circulate that air around effectively. The nice thing about this kind of a system is you can reverse it in summertime, and I have no trouble keeping my house. I'll go into the passive cooling mode a little bit in a moment. I just basically reverse the cycle. I can keep my house 10 to 15 degrees below ambient temperature throughout the summer quite easily. People think it's air conditioned and it's not. Now remember, sun's high in the sky. You saw the diagram earlier on. You keep it out of the house by closing the windows, closing the skylights. You keep the cool in the house. You've got all this thermal mass. The night before, you've opened the windows, you've flushed out the house. The great thing we've got in the upper Midwest that they do not have, say, in Alabama or Florida, is we've got temperature changes. We've got a diurnal cycle that looks like this. You know, this is in the house. I've got 2 data loggers right now. It's got a lot of monitors that are not hooked up yet, but these 2 digital data loggers give you a lot of data. One on the inside, one on the outside. They're of the house. They're identical, and they give me every 11 minutes, reading of temperature and humidity for 9 months on a battery charge. So the blue is humidity, the red is temperature. In this graph, the green is dew point. Even if you're sitting, you can't read the units. You can see the shape of the graph, right? Night cool, day warm, up and down. This is August 23rd to October 4th, so a couple months of data. What you might not be able to see is back here in August, for whatever reason, there was a couple, 3-4 days of 50 degree, 52 degree nights. In September, there was a string of 80, 85 degree, 88 degree days. You know that my neighbors had their furnaces on at 55 or 52. You know that they had their air conditioning on when it was 88 out. This is what the outside. Here's the inside, the identical logger. I messed up on the days. It's not quite screwed up on the computer, but anyway, you see the shape of the graph is very different. Here's 70, 75, 72. This house is flatlining in the comfort zone. And the important part of this graph is this is the house doing this by itself, freewheeling in the environment. There's no energy inputs during these periods. There's no air conditioning on. The house doesn't have air conditioning. There's no heater on. During those 52 degree nights, the house is at 70, 72, gets down to 68. During those 88 degree days, those mornings actually over here, house is flatlining. It's doing this by itself because of the way it's shaped, because of what it's made out of, and because of how it's oriented. Now, this is a fairly mild time of year to heat and cool, right? I mean, this is, the time of year. So here's a graph that shows a 9-month period this is the next season, from the 17th of January to the 15th of September. And so it's more jaggedy looking because I took 9 months of data and squished it into the same size of slice, so the lines get more jaggedy. And I've taken out the humidity, because otherwise the diagram gets really difficult to read. So you're seeing outside temperature in this kind of pinky magenta. Is that what it looks like to you? The red is the interior logger. So 2 loggers now, same slide. This yellow band I put in there for clarity. That's what I'll just call it the extended comfort zone, 55 to 80. I want to see what the house is going to do. This orange line, which you may not even be able to see, is my target, 70 degrees. Okay, I'd like the house to be around there. I'm going to see what the house does. Okay, my kids are grown, moved out of the house. I'm living alone now. I can do whatever I want. So I turn off the heat on the spring equinox. Heating system goes off. Until then, I keep the house around 60. These spikes are when I do a tour or there's a party there. So this is what the logger is showing, my heating system keeping the house. Here's the outside temperature doing whatever it does, get down below zero. This year was, I think, 2006. It was a fairly mild winter. But you're seeing the very, very normal, jaggedy kind of trend of the outside. The house is staying consistent. I turn off the heat to see what happens. I want to see what the house does for the rest of the year. No energy inputs. And it becomes very interesting. The heat is, the outside temperature is still getting down to freezing in a few cases, but the house is sitting up here in the comfort zone. It's going up and down diurnally, but it's staying within that extended comfort zone, and it's really hanging a lot of the year at around that 70 degree mark. What gets really interesting is there's this point, and this is a couple hours, that's maybe 6 or 8 hours, that's maybe a day and a half of time when the house even got above 80 the entire summer long. The rest of the time, it's in that, below 80. Most of the time, it's hovering right around 70. So this is the result of, again, shaping the house and putting materials in such a way that it tends to heat itself in the winter and cool itself in the summer. It's not just enough to heat itself in the winter. I live in Madison. Madison Gas and Electric is our utility, and They have a website, a great website. You can actually go and put in your data of your house, the size and so on, and they you can only see your heating bills if you put in your password, but you can see sort of an average. And so what this slide is, this is copy right off their website. This is 30,000 houses in Madison, and then they show you where your house. This yellow red line is where my house is. I don't know who all these other people are. But the point that I make is I'm doing this. You know, I'm not. This is not like custom vacuum windows from Germany and high-tech space foam from DuPont or something. This is like I'm getting this kind of performance with natural materials. My heating bill this last year, I actually haven't figured it out for this last year. The year before that, it was $406 for the year. And it really hovers around, gas has gone up a little bit, but when I first started monitoring in 2005, you saw the original graph, I think my heating bill was $356 for the year, and it's crept up a few dollars each year, depends on the weather.
Those are vacant houses.
What's that?
Those are vacant houses.
Those are vacant houses. So we're using this as this work as a way to research. I mean, this. The clay science stuff, if you stick around for the talk after this, you'll hear a lot about clay science. We're having to rediscover this stuff. Earth and plasters. There's a small community of people. Again, in our tent, there's a great natural plaster. Eric knows what you can see him do his work before. We're basically rediscovering materials that have served people building homes for millennia and upgrading them. Adding the science and the understanding. You can go online if you want on our website. I'll give you the website address at the end. You can even see this report where we had Forest Products Laboratory test the material and get the area.
Yeah, does humidity moderate in that house? I mean, so the outside is crazy. Is it better inside? And I tried to follow your graphic. It was too fast.
Okay.
Does it ever get wet inside?
So she's got two questions. I'll repeat them. What about humidity, or does the house deal with humidity at all? And then I think the other one, does the house get wet on the
In
inside?
other words, because of the dew point, you get condensation on
Yeah.
stuff.
In fact, just the opposite. So the short answer is, remember we talked about clay, how hydrophilic it just wants water like crazy. The thing that I knew this house, because I designed a lot of passive solar houses before this, I knew it was going to work in terms of passive solar, the thermal mass and all that. What I did not realize until I lived in it, and it took me several years to dawn on me, is how the tons and tons of clay in there deal with humidity. I suppose I should go back to the graph. When we talk about humidity, what we're talking about really is moisture in the air. And we're actually talking most of the time, most common conversations are about relative humidity, not absolute humidity. In other words, amount of water in the air relative to the temperature of the air. If you've taken basic high school chemistry, you know that warm air holds more moisture, can hold more moisture than cool air. So that's why we got muggy summers, and we've got a lot of moisture in this state, in the upper Midwest. We have warm temperatures. That air can hold more moisture, just hold more molecules suspended in the air. Cool the temperature, and you get less. So one of the reasons you see that spike, this cycle here, you see it both in temperature and in humidity. It's not that the amount of humidity is varying drastically. The amount of absolute number of molecules per cubic inch of air is varying that drastically. What's happening is that the relative humidity relative to temperature. So as temperature goes up and down, the humidity is changing. Is that making sense? So when you get to a situation like this where the temperature is being held constant by the nature of the building, the humidity level is also being held much more constant. This house is very constant in humidity. I've never measured it below 35% in wintertime, and it's usually hovering around 40, 45, which is a pretty comfortable level. I've never seen it over 65 in the house, and it's usually in the summertime. It's usually like in the 50s, 55, like that, 60. So the house, all that clay and all that earth and plaster and all that straw clay is able to absorb and desorb tons of water, basically. Slowly, it's not doing this fast. It's not like a dehumidifier, but if you keep the house closed up and open, open and closed like I was describing, the house actually stays very constant humidity-wise, and that's something that I didn't know until I lived in that kind of. In this country, we tend to build, especially modern buildings, very lightweight, not thermal mass at all, and very. If it's a good house, it's well insulated, but there's not a lot of thermal mass, so it's very lightweight and very, what do I want to say, like thin. We use materials Joe Stepik, if you know who he is, building scientist from Canada, does great work. He's estimated that the materials we now build with can handle perhaps, I think I have this quote right, about 10% of the moisture that they used to be able to handle, say, 100 years ago. Just the stuff we're making the buildings out of. If you take a stud frame house, you put insulation and you put plastic vapor barrier and then drywall, you've got basically your active humidity control is like, ½ inch or 5/8 of an inch thick skin. And then you've got outside of that is a plastic bag. If it's done well, it's sealed tight. You have very little ability for the house itself, the materials itself, to naturally control humidity. So what do we do? We introduce mechanical means: dehumidifiers, humidifiers, air conditioners that dehumidify, heating systems that dry and then add moisture. We solve the problems, the comfort problems, mechanically rather than naturally. And so, and I have a heat recovery ventilator in the house. I'll show you a picture of one of those later. I certainly had ventilation, but what was a revelation to me on this house was how well the house dealt with humidity as well as temperature. Is that making sense?
You don't have mold or mildew issues on clothing or anything else, or you don't?
No, the question about mold and mildew, I mean, if I've got mold and mildew on the clothes, it's because of my housekeeping habits, not because of the house. Hanging stuff. Yes.
So you're not using any vapor barriers?
There's no vapor,
or Tyvek on the outside or any of that?
Well, those are two different things. I don't know if you heard this comment, the difference between, that's a whole long discussion. The straw clay, like straw bale, like many of these natural wall systems, and we're just talking about wall systems. There's a lot more to a house than a wall system, but all of us tend to fixate on wall systems. No vapor barriers. I have been predicting now for a few years that vapor barriers are going to get written out of codes. In 10, I used to say 10 years, now I'm going to say under 10 years. There are really a lot of problems with vapor barriers. And it's a long discussion, and I shouldn't get into it because it's a huge digression, but suffice to say that vapor barriers are not what we used to think they were. They're certainly not what we were taught in architecture school. They don't function that way. We have a much better understanding with the recent advances in building science. We have a much better understanding of how wall cavities work, how vapor barriers work, so-called vapor barriers, how air infiltration and backup drainage planes like house wrap is. Totally separate, very different functions. So to answer your question, yeah, no vapor barriers, but the way we're dealing, you also can't, I suppose I should go into a little bit more. You can't have a house that leaks. In this climate, you can't have a sieve. It's got to be tight, I mean, it's one of the reasons why, I'll go through these slides and you can just see them while I'm talking. You can do two things at once in your mind. Lots of natural materials, lots of recycled materials, a lot of reused materials, all of those are different. We even reused the communion rail from a decommissioned communion rail from a church as the front porch railing, which you might have spotted in the first. That's one of the most fun things. We're using kitchen cabinets, for example, in downtown Madison. They did actually a very good job of tearing down this whole block of buildings for our new civic center. And one of the things was they had invited the public in, and you could go through and get blinds or carpets or whatever. In my case, I got $200 worth of cabinets, probably $3,000 worth of cabinets for $200. Brought them to my house. They're off-gassing formaldehyde like crazy. Like most cabinets in this country, they're built with particle board, beautifully made cabinets. Commercial quality hardware that came out of a lawyer's office, but they're poisonous. So I buy a product called Safe Seal. By the way, you can get this afmsafecoat.com. There's the Midwest distributorship is in Genesee Depot, which is near Waukesha, so we're really lucky we've got it close by. This is a product that you can coat on particle board, or indeed any solid thing that's contains formaldehyde or any of these other kinds of products, toxins that off-gas, and it seals it in. Formaldehyde is still in the particle board, but it's not getting into my air. I'm able to reuse a product safely and recycle, but still be non-toxic. We use kitchen counters or old lab tops from a laboratory that was getting demolished. In Madison, we have the great good fortune of having Habitat for Humanity run a store called Restore, and there's a lot of these around the country now. Sort of the goodwill of the construction industry. People donate stuff. You can go out and buy. So my kitchen sinks and stuff are recycled. Here's what it looks like: recycled tile floors, kitchen cabinets, and countertops, all recycled. I said I would talk, and I'm going to get back to your question, so I haven't forgot. I just got a slide about it later. I said I'd talk a little bit about universal design as a sustainability issue. A little bit of context here. Our architectural office has been working for the last 35 years or so, very often with people with various kinds of disabilities, all across the spectrum, mild to severe. And so we've worked with hundreds of people. And it's, of course, got us very sensitized, sort of in our design DNA of how you deal with that. But one of the things we realized in the process of doing that, we're doing this ecological work, right? We're doing this accessibility work, and we're, for the accessibility work, many times we're sending tons and tons of material to the landfill because the door wasn't quite wide enough, or the hallway wasn't quite wide enough, or we're tearing out a porch because, there's no way to get in the house. And it starts to dawn after a while. It's like there's a better way to design homes. If you have the opportunity to design new, you design this stuff in from the get-go. A few extra inches to the hallway width, or just paying attention to the turning radius into the bathroom, making the bathroom those few inches extra so that a wheelchair can navigate, becomes easy to do. It's just sort of built into the design. And then, once you've done that, that house is like that forever. It doesn't have to be remodeled 10 years or 20 years when somebody in a wheelchair, or God forbid any of us, we're all sort of temporarily enabled. We're a stumble off the curb or a skiing accident away from being disabled for a while. Or, if you've got a mother-in-law, if you've got a child who uses a wheelchair, whatever. Having the house through its lifetime be able to basically serve, if not all people, then most people. I mean, there's cases of, spinal cord injuries or whatever, I can get into it, where people are severely disabled and need really specialized building accommodations. Most disabilities you can handle with good design from the get-go. So it's a sustainability issue. A house that can handle the breadth of human experience and age ranges is going to be a more sustainable house. It's going to be around. It's going to, especially if you build it well and you build it durably. So we get to ventilation and issues of air quality. It's like I said before, if you design a house that's tight, you have to design a house that's tight in this climate. It can't be a sieve. If you want to heat it, it's got to be airtight. I don't care if you're using a conventional system or you're using alternative construction. That's one of the main jobs. So as soon as you do that, though, you've created a problem. And we discovered this, the architectural profession, the construction profession over the 70s and 80s did a lot of sick buildings. You've heard of sick buildings. We're tightening up buildings, insulating them better, and getting people sick. Mold, mildew, every time you breathe out, you're breathing carbon dioxide. Every time you burn the toast, every time you take a shower, you maybe use a cleaning product you shouldn't be using, you're putting toxins in the air. If you got a leaky house, no problem, or less problem. You got a tight house, you got a problem. You're rebreathing all of that stuff. So you need to solve both problems. You need to ventilate, and you need a tight house. The answer is a unit like this. People know about these. These are heat recovery ventilators. These are made in Wisconsin, renewair.com. Basically, they use the outgoing stale air that you're trying to get rid of, and they're bringing in fresh air simultaneously. So they're already doing something better than a ceiling fan or a bath fan or a kitchen fan. Fresh air coming in, stale air going out. What it does inside the unit is it passes those air streams close to each other. There's a film, usually plastic, stainless steel paper, whatever, where the heat transfers. So the outgoing air is heating the incoming air. It's not 100%, but you're getting much more energy efficient ventilation than, say, opening the window or door because you did something you shouldn't do. High efficiency mechanicals. I don't care if you've got a conventional house or if you've got a natural, alternative construction house. High efficiency mechanicals are important. In this case, because the heating needs of the house are so small, I got a unit that does both the water heating and the space heating together. It has a little computer in it, can tell the difference between the thermostat and the shower. And the upside of this is, many of you probably know, your standard water heater that's sitting in your basement, if you're lucky, is 65% efficient. That's the conventional, that's a good one. So that means for every dollar you're spending on heating that water, you're throwing 35 cents out on the street, It just doesn't make any sense. So units like these instantaneous units, or now these combined units, we're going to be heating. This is an old one. I put this in 2002, I think. You can get better now. 95% efficiency. So you're heating not only your house at that efficiency rate, you're also heating your water. And once you've got your house really efficient, your second next cost, bulk cost, total cost in the house, is hot water. So it makes a difference.
Do you also have an active in your house?
No, you might have come in late. I talked about the house is set up for active solar, but I don't have enough solar exposure yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that whole discussion.
Okay.
So the heat is delivered a number of different ways. In-floor hydronic, whole discussion there. Make sure you decouple your thermal mass from your heating mass. Much misunderstood topic. I also use recycled cast iron baseboards, which are really wonderful in my preferred system. Radiant heat, if you've got in the ceiling, if you've got low ceilings, if you're not above 10 or 11 feet, you can actually put radiance, and you've got good insulation above it, of course. You can actually put radiant tubes in the ceiling and get nice effective heat that way as well. So it gives you a lot of options for heating systems. This is a shot of the back part of the house, actually the original part of the house. The house I've been showing you this whole time, it's actually an addition that's 5 times larger than the original house. Hold on to their discussion, big zoning discussion. But the back part of the house now, how many of you have heard of something called super insulated houses or a passive house? Heard of passive, which is essentially it's the modern rebranding of an old idea. The back of the house will be talking about or demonstrating those kinds of principles, how those integrate. So that's. I want to leave a little time for questions, so I'm going to whip by this.
Do you have 3 heating systems in your floor? You have.
The question is, do I have 3 heating systems? I have 3 heating delivery systems. I have 1 heating system, hydronic. The nice thing about hydronic, it's water heat. It can deliver the heat in different ways, and so I was just showing you the different ways.
Why would you want 3? I mean, if your house is really tight and efficient, that's overheating, isn't it? I mean,
The question is, why would I want 3 distribution systems with the house overheat? No, the house won't overheat because it's got thermostats, it's got zones. I have zones in the house so that I can keep some cool and some warm. That's the main reason.
you don't use all 3 at once.
On a really cold day, they might all be running, a little bit. It's not. That's a whole discussion about
I've never seen that
physics.
before.
It's not about okay.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm going to rip through these. We do home workshops. One of the things we've discovered with the straw clay is you really need some training to get the quality control. You're producing an on-site building insulation product. You need training on how to use the equipment. So this is actually we're doing some up in Indian country. This is the St. Croix Reservation. We built a few houses. This is one of their houses. I put it in the slide so you can see kind of what a house looks like before it gets the siding on it. All the straw clay walls. This is our latest project. This was in Spring Green a few weeks ago. In order to reduce the cost, because we're talking about a kind of a specialized framing system that's very resource efficient but takes some careful thinking, we're talking about a specialized, alternative insulation system. We realized we're able to do this, but we want to make this more affordable, more accessible. So one of the things that we've come up with, and we're still working on this, is what we're calling a chassis house. And this is, the basic idea is a house that's pre-engineered, the studs like we talked about, the insulation and so on, but designed in such a way that it can adapt over the life cycle of a family. It can start out as a studio for a single person or a couple. You can add bedrooms when children come or the in-laws come. You can have a den next to a studio. Then that studio can become another bedroom. This 1,400 square foot house can go from basically a 1-story thing to a 1.5-story thing with 4 bedrooms. There's even a version here, I think it's coming up, where the house turns into a 2-unit. So kids move out now, and you can rent out you can arrange the stairs so basically all your gravity loads and wind loads are handled in the shell. All of your mechanicals in there, and you can do anything you want in the whole rest of the house. So the house, you think of as the house as a chassis into which you add anything. I want to stop there.